And in the name of the Father, Son, the Holy Spirit. Amen. Lord, thank you again for this wonderful evening. Nakapag-gather po uli kami upang maumpisahan itong aming review class again. Sana po you give us wisdom and perseverance para matutunan itong mga pointers na ibinibigay sa amin ni Ma'am Ana. This all we ask in your name. In the name of the Father, Son, the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Thank you, Sir Jose. Okay. This is not really a new topic for some other people because I've already done economic planning for especially for those who have attended early on, like January or February, parang ganun. But for because I feel economic planning will be one of the most important um, topics for your ENP examination. So let's do it again. Mamaster natin, ano, for those who are hearing this for the second time or third time. So let's do that. Jen, do you mind sharing that slides? Okay. So our topic is economic planning. We may not be able to do this for one evening. We can continue again tomorrow. So let's see. That's economic planning. That's lecture 13. So please move to the next slide, Jen. So there's a matrix there. Okay, next slide. So matrix. Next slide. Can you hear me well? Okay. Lakasan ko. Um, that's you are seeing their economic growth versus economic development. So let's try to make a distinction between the two. These are important terms as it underpins much of our work as planners. And let's find the difference between economic growth and economic development. These two terms are often used interchangeably, but they're not well in urban and regional. Okay, so because we're very concerned about recording, so I'd like to go back again. That I was saying early on that uh, economic growth for society's overall production of goods and services. We measure it in terms of output, typically as an increase in per capita income or GDP. Okay, so please note the terminologies. Growth is by its nature quantitative. It means that it deals with exchange values and gives us a sense of how much more is being produced or earned compared to previous periods. However, growth in output alone doesn't tell us whether people's lives are truly improving. So we cannot just, we cannot discern or we cannot decipher it outright. So this is where economic development comes in. Development is a broader, more comprehensive standard of living for the majority of the population. This includes not only quantitative measures like income or output, but also qualitative improvements such as better health, um, access to education, social justice, and environmental sustainability. Growth tends to be one-dimensional, focusing just on numbers. Development, on the other hand, is multidimensional. So I hope that's clear to everyone. It encompasses economic progress. I mean, I'm talking about development. Um, but also it deals with social, political, environmental, and cultural advancement, among others. For planning professionals, this distinction is important. We don't just chase after higher numbers. We aim to foster genuine, inclusive progress that's felt across different segments of society. So there's a useful analogy here, that um, we can just imagine a pie. Okay, so economic growth is about making a bigger pie. Okay, we need to keep this pie bigger, economic. So that's an analogy or economic analogy. But it doesn't address how the pie is sliced. So are the slices distributed fairly? Does everyone get a piece? That's the essence now of development. That is, we ensure that growth translates into real improvements in people's lives. So distinction is echoed by prominent thinkers. So later you would see some people, faces of people there. There, for example, Albert Hirschman, who knows it will be asked in your board exams. So you should know. Dapat makilala ninyo si Albert Hirschman. He pointed out that growth can occur without development. So did he how did he theorize things, especially about economics? uh but we are urban planners, we are urban and regional planners, environmental planners. Of course, we need to be a generalist. At the same time, we have to be specialists. So in this case, we're talking about economic planning, and we need to analyze so that we can plan well. Okay. So again, I would like to go back to Albert Hirschman. He pointed out that growth can occur without development, especially when benefits fail to reach the broader population, as in failed trickle down scenarios. So you're very familiar with planning terms like trickle down. Okay. Also, Amartya Sen, okay, you're seeing them all in this matrix. Amartya Sen is another thinker. He is an economic thinker. He reminds us that while growth is necessary for development, it's not sufficient on its own. Growth lays the foundation, but it's not the end. So for us in urban planning, the key takeaway is this: it's not enough for a city or a country to simply grow economically. We must ensure that this growth leads to actual development, lifting standards of living, promoting equity and justice, and improving overall quality of life. So you can just imagine how planners are supposed to be contributing to this end goal. So maybe we can go to the next slide, Jen. So it's just a definition on economic development in general. So, but there are some key points here. But first thing, there's economic development is about enhancing the factors of productive capacity, land, labor, capital, and technology of a national, regional, or local economy. And then there are four economic objectives of economic development. So, but what are we really aiming for when we push for economic development? So in this slide, it laid out there are four clear objectives here. Um, and this should guide our planning decisions. First, we want to raise income and living standards. Uh, so it's about making sure that people's lives are improving in meaningful ways, more disposable income, better housing, access to education, and a sense of security about the future. So these are indicators of raising incomes and living standards. And second, we need to increase the availability of basic goods and services. So it's about making sure that everyone can access essentials. What are these? Food, water, healthcare, energy, and education. And so the presence and accessibility of these services are direct indicators of how far a community has come in its development path or pathway. Third, economic development aims to expand the range of social and economic choices available to individuals. So a developed community gives people real options where to work. Fourth, and this is just as crucial, is fairness and equity in income distribution. So it's not enough for the average income to go up if the benefits are only going to a small segment of the population. Development must be inclusive. So we always say that, and we always try to include that in our rates. So, and so this redistributive focus is at the center of sustainable, resilient communities, especially when we are developing our vision for our city or municipality. So the main goal then is to improve the overall well-being of the community. We do this by creating and retaining jobs, expanding the tax base, and most importantly, enhancing the quality. So sounds familiar, does it? Because we know the SDGs, right? So, uh, eh, no one should be left behind, and many more, right? Many more frameworks about the SDGs, but that's the main thing. So each intervention we make in our respective cities or municipalities, from land use policy to infrastructure development, should be assessed by how well it supports these objectives. So we can go to the next page. Yeah. Next slide. So this is the role of government in economic development. Um, so it's really important to recognize that government action remains the center or the focus of meaningful economic development at every scale. What are these at the national, regional, or local scale? And that the primary responsibility and the overall productivity of resources. So this isn't limited to grand national policy. It applies just as much in a region, city, town, or even neighborhoods. So government sets the tempo, um, ensuring that the foundations for a dynamic, productive, and resilient local economy are solid. So do you know the formula of tempo? So there are, these are some of these terminologies that we need to really be familiarized about. So one of the most effective ways or ways government influences economic development is by lowering the barriers and risks that discourage private sector investment. So when government puts its resources and authority behind initiatives that reduce costs or uncertainty, uncertainties, it sends a powerful signal that this is a safe and viable environment for investment and job creation. So we also have formula on how do we compute job creation, what are the variables that should be considered in assessing or computing jobs created. So we will come to that. Not probably not tonight, but succeeding nights because we need some formula. We need to compute some, you know, we need to compute, and I need to give you some formula for that. But now let me continue about this general concepts. So government does not necessarily have to be the main investor, but it must create the conditions that allow private capital to flow confidently. So I hope you understand that framework. Government's role or government's role in economic development can be categorized into three main types of interventions. First, there are the broad economic policies. Okay, in the slide. And we are referring to the high level strategies such as maintaining stable inflation, pursuing policies that lead to high employment, and supporting sustainable long term growth. These objectives ensure that the basic economic environment is healthy and predictable, which is essential for both businesses and households. Second, okay, government provides direct services and infrastructure. It's good. Okay, the first one, broad economic policies. Then we have the direct services and infrastructure. Examples include building highways, maintaining parks, and ensuring medical care reaches underserved populations. These investments not only improve quality of life but also create the backbone for commerce, and mobility, allowing both people and goods to move efficiently across regions. Third, government takes deliberate steps to make the business climate more conducive to enterprise and innovation. This is done through targeted programs such as providing business finance, supporting marketing efforts, promoting neighborhood revitalization, and facilitating technology transfer. Additionally, policies aimed at business retention and expansion as well as real estate development help also grow local economies. It's this multi-layered approach that truly enables economic development. So when government addresses macroeconomic stability, or provides essential infrastructure and services, I'm trying to um, summarize it, and cultivates a supportive environment for private investment, all the key elements for growth and development fall into place. So, as future environmental planners, maybe you would be also be keen at becoming policy planners. It's important to keep in mind that effective economic development always relies on a strategic partnership between government and the private sector, guided by policies, programs that directly address both immediate needs and long-term goals. So we can go to the next slide, but these are some phases of the major economies throughout history. Um, kapag ka meron kayong kakilala, you may unmute and tell me who they are and what do they thought about or what were their contribution anyway. So they're the major economies throughout history, but we have a dedicated topic on this one. Uh, but when we analyze current policies and planning frameworks, it's also important to acknowledge the thinkers whose ideas continue to shape economic planning and development. So they bring unique perspective that still are applied or being applied or that still resonates in our discussions about growth, equity, and the role of the state. So, for example, Adam Smith, I hope you remember them. So we have like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times 3, 15 people here. Kapag ka may kalahati, so 50 lang yung makukuha nyo. What if they uh, lumabas lahat yan, 50%, eh, di ba? 70 ang passing or if in history, so that comprises 20% of your exam and hindi nyo sila kilala, huhula. Okay. S- So, yeah, I just stopped so that I can. For those people who are accessing Zoom recording and they can still follow, okay? So, Adam Smith, well, he's often called the father of modern economics. So you should remember that. He's the father of modern economics. So he has this famous work, The Wealth of Nations. He laid the groundwork for free market theory and the concept of the invisible hand. So, how about Thomas Malthus? When I was with the School of Urban and Regional Planning, and while I was a student in 1990s, we used to, we do it every day before. So because I was a full-time student, what we do is each day of each class, each day of the semester, we write in yellow pad, each planner, economic, regional planners, uh, all sorts. We are required to write in yellow pad. So one thinker or one theories per sheet of yellow pad, and then we need to memorize it, and we need to fill that out, that one sheet of paper, and we or also recite it after, and we need to memorize it. So probably that was the reason why up to now I still memorize most of them. So I hope for your preparation nagawa na ninyo because you did master's program. So it is expected upon all of you that meron na yung mga tao parang yun na yung ano ninyo, pinaka basic kwan that you need to be familiarized of each of them. Like for example, Thomas Malthus, he warned about the dangers of population growth outpacing food supply. So a concern that echoes in modern debates of sustainability. Karl Marx siguro, everyone, siguro 100% in this group, you're familiar with Karl Marx. So he critiqued capitalism, and introduced the concepts of socialism, di ba? And class struggles. He emphasized how economic structures affect social relations. Sino pa ba yung mga sikat dito? Robert Owen. Robert Owen is noted as the father of normative socialism, advocating for social reform and better conditions for workers. Uh, So, how about Simon Kuznets? Simon Kuznets, he pioneered methods for measuring economic growth, including the development of GDP as an indicator. Okay, please don't forget Simon Kuznets. Milton Friedman was a champion of monetarism and minimal government intervention, promoting the idea that free markets produce the best outcomes. Then John Stuart Mill, he worked on liberty and utilitarianism, exposing or exploring the balance between individual freedom and social good. And then John Maynard Keynes revolutionized economics with his advocacy for active government intervention, especially during periods of economic downturn, and many more. Amartya Sen, of course, we should not forget Amartya Sen, especially in the context or in this field, economic planning. He focuses on welfare economics. Okay, I'll repeat that. Welfare economics, development, and human capabilities, stressing that real development must enhance people's freedoms and choices. So, as planners, we draw from all of them, their theories, and sometimes consciously, sometimes embedded in the policies and systems we inherit. So their theories gives us frameworks for evaluating growth, equity, efficiency, sustainability, and more. So as you prepare for your licensure exams, so it will really help you understand the what's, the how's, the why's behind economic policies and economic planning. So because of them, and you would be able to understand everything uh, because they would remind you of their special contributions. So we can go to the next slide. It's not really a very clear um diagram, but I think we can still see it anyway. It's quite malabo, no? And so this is a slide on interconnectedness of economic theories that you'll notice the early foundations, classical, okay? Classical economics. And uh, you should have you should have an idea of every bit of this economic theories. So let's start with classical economics from the 18th and 19th centuries, which centers on the market mechanism, self-interest, and the idea of an economy reaching equilibrium on its own. So earlier we we saw Adam Smith. So Adam Smith and David Ricardo are central here. Moving along, you see the neoclassical economics branch in the late 19th century. This school places strong emphasis on rational behavior, resource allocation, efficiency, and it forms the basis for many of today's market-based policies. And parallel to this is the evolution towards neo-Keynesian and monetarist thought. Keynesians advocating for government intervention to stabilize economies, and monetarists emphasizing control of the money supply. All these have given rise to what is called the market model of environmental management. This model assumes that the market, if properly regulated, can address environmental concerns, but also recognizes the role of government intervention when market solutions fall short. Okay, and on the right, let me just make it bigger. On the right, sorry if you can make it bigger, Jen. We see the path of Marxist economics. Here, focus shifts to class relations, the role of production, and social equity. Marxist theory questions the distribution of resources and power and remains influential in critiques of mainstream economic policy, especially regarding inequality. The chart also traces the emergence of institutional economics and humanistic economics norms and organizations in shaping economic outcomes, while humanistic economics or economists put weight on issues like altruism, distributive equity. You can see here, parang hindi ko na makita. and sustainable communities. And down the center, I hope I can see later a better copy so I can still give you. So please remind me, Jen. In the center, you'll find the increasing recognition of environmental economics and co-evolutionary economics. These approaches integrate insights from physical and natural sciences, acknowledging that economic systems and the environment are interdependent. Here, the focus is not on only on growth or output, but on long-term sustainability and resilience. The co-evolutionary perspective in particular argues that economic development is shaped by how societies respond to environmental change, which in turn influences future development paths. So throughout the diagram, please note the constant tension and overlap between market must be maintained perspectives and those advocating for active government intervention to safeguard public goods, especially environmental quality. What does this mean for us? As planners, we don't operate within just one school of thought. Every decision about land use, zoning, infrastructure, and economic incentives involves weighing these different ideas. Effective planning requires understanding the logic and limitations of each approach, recognizing where they support each other and where they might conflict. So, for your exams and your practice, remember economic theories are not isolated. They build upon challenge and inform each other, shaping the options and policies available. Okay? So, especially those policies available to us today. So, we can go to the next one, economic theory. Okay, so that not a first time for some people. Um, so this slide illustrates how economic theory adapts to waves of innovation over time. Okay, waves of innovation over time. The graph shows the progression of technological change since the late 18th century, and there were mapped as a series of waves. Each truths triggered economic transformation and required new ways of thinking, planning, and policy making. The first wave began around 1785. You can see the graph there, the x-axis. So it began around 1785 with the rise of iron production, water power, mechanized textiles, and the expansion of commerce. This period launched the Industrial Revolution and set the stage for modern economic thought, particularly classical economics, which focuses on market forces and the division of labor. The second wave, around the turn of the 20th century, saw the rise of electricity, chemicals, the internal combustion engine, and mass manufacturing. This period called for new approaches to economic management, including early versions of macroeconomic policy and institutional economics. The fourth wave emerged in the post-war era with petrochemicals, electronics, aviation, and space technology. And this era emphasized the importance of innovation, research and development, what we call the R&D, and the beginnings of information technology or the IT, which challenged traditional models and required planners to consider globalization and complex supply chains. The fifth wave is characterized by digital networks, biotechnology, software, and information technology. So the rapid spread of digital technologies disrupted old industries and gave rise to new forms of enterprise, leading to renewed debates about regulation, intellectual property, and digital divide. Looking ahead, the diagram suggests a sixth wave. Okay, so this is not really an updated um waves of innovation because it's only until 2020 and we are now in 2025, and there must be a more updated formation or the waves of innovation here, because it did not consider post-pandemic, etc. So yeah, but the sixth wave defined was defined by sustainability. And here, innovation centers on radical resource productivity, integrated system design. I'm just reading from the graph here. Um, then biomimicry, green chemistry, industrial ecology, renewable energy. Of course, we're here already. Nanotechnology. So for planners, this means that economic theory and practice must now incorporate environmental constraints, and we are now also into circular economy as another concept, and the pursuit of long-term resilience. So each wave of innovation challenges existing theories and pushes planning practice to evolve. So theories that work in one era may become outdated or insufficient as new technologies emerge and priorities shift. So the key for us is to remain aware of the shifts, continuously updating our frameworks and strategies to address the demands of the current wave, especially with the urgent need for sustainable solutions. So we can go to the next slide and try to advance because I already mentioned about it. You advance that. Okay. For this slide, okay. So system of national accounts as measures of economic growth. I repeat that system of national accounts as measures of economic growth, diba? Growth versus development. So it gives us this system of national accounts gives us standardized way to measure a country's economic activity. The groundwork for this system was laid out by Dr. Simon Kuznets. So it's not the first time you heard this tonight. I mentioned that early in the earlier slide. So he is a Nobel laureate. His work remains fundamental, especially in understanding and comparing the performance of different economies. So GDP here is the total market value. So this is also important because a number of times topics on GDP also were given in past board exams. So GDP is the total market value of all final goods and services produced for end use within a country's borders during a specific period, typically 1 year. The focus is strictly on activities that happen inside the country. Again, I'll say that again. The focus is strictly on activities that happen inside the country, regardless of who owns the assets or who provides the labor. It's important to note that GDP only counts the value of final goods and services. It ignores transactions where no new goods or services are produced, such as the resale of existing products. Also, it does not include transfer payments, subsidies, or OFW remittances, as these are not payments for new goods or services. So that's gross domestic product or GDP. Now, um, how about gross national product, GNP? It takes a different approach. It measures the total output produced by a country's citizens, no matter where they are in the world. This means GNP includes the value of goods and services produced by Filipinos working abroad, as well as earnings from overseas investments. To capture this, GNP includes what we call net factor income from abroad or NFIA for the Philippines. This is largely made up of OFW remittances and income from foreign assets. So while GDP focuses on location, GNP focuses on ownership or nationality. Focuses on ownership or nationality. So what's the relationship between GDP and GNP? A country can have a stagnant or even declining GDP, but still see its GNP grow, especially if NFIA, what's NFIA again? Net factor income from abroad, especially if NFIA, such as remittances, increases. This is often the case for economies with a large number of workers or investments abroad. So, nominal GDP versus real GDP. Nominal GDP measures all goods and services at current market prices, so it is affected by inflation. Real GDP, on the other hand, values outputs or output using constant prices from a reference year. This adjustment using the consumer price index allows us to separate true economic growth from the effects of inflation. So these indicators are not just academic sort of thing. They have direct implications for planning, policy making, and monitoring development. Understanding how GDP and GDP are measured, what they include, and how to interpret changes. These are all fundamental for planners involved in economic assessment, for example, in program evaluation or investment analysis. So, we can go to the next slide. Konti na lang. So, system of national accounts as measures of economic growth. And these are approaches to measuring GDP actually. When we talk about GDP as a measure of economic growth, it's important to understand that there are multiple ways to arrive at the same number. Economists and statisticians usually rely on three main approaches, but in this slide, you can see focuses on the two most commonly used, the expenditure approach and the income approach. Okay, so GDP by expenditure approach is often summarized by the formula Y equals C plus I plus G plus open and close parenthesis EX minus IM. Okay, C stands for consumption. Okay, so you just have an idea. C stands for consumption. This includes all spending by households on durable goods like appliances, cars, and non-durable goods means the food and services. Okay. So I is investment covering business expenditures and structures, equipment, new housing and changes in inventories, etc. G represents government expenditures or spending by both local and national governments on both consumption and investment. So, um, the exports, okay, EX minus IM, X minus IM, ganon. So, it's the net exports. This means the value of exports minus imports. So, exports add to GDP because they are produced locally, okay? While imports are subtracted because they're produced elsewhere. So in summary, the expenditure approach tallies up all final spending in the economy, whether by households, businesses, or governments, and adjust for trade. So that's about the GDP by expenditure approach. And the other one is GDP by income approach. This method starts from the income slide. It adds up all the income earned by households and firms in the production of goods and services. So there are main components, and they're number one, the national income. National income means all wages, rents, interest, and profits generated by production. Depreciation, it's an estimate, often about 12%, an estimate of the value of capital equipment that wears out or becomes obsolete. And so here, indirect taxes minus subsidies, because we need to adjust market prices for government intervention. Then net factor payments to the rest of the world. You can see in such as interest and dividends paid abroad and received from abroad. So when you add national income and depreciation, adjust for taxes, subsidies, and net factor payments, you arrive at net domestic product, which is GDP minus depreciation, while net national income is NDP plus net factor income from abroad. So, both approaches are used for cross-checking the accuracy of the country's national accounts. And for planning, knowing these components allows us to analyze where growth is coming from. Is it consumption driven? Is it investment led, or reliant, or we rely on external trade? So it also helps us planners identify which sectors or activities may need more support or regulation. So we go to the next slide. Jen, the next slide. Okay. Um, so this is the production approach, uh, also called the value added approach. Is the third way, or is the third major way to measure GDP or GNP. And here we sum up the value added at every stage of production throughout the economy. What does value added mean? At each step in the production process, value is created, and that's why it's called value added. For example, a farmer, just a moment, I'll just drink water. Okay. For example, a farmer grows wheat, which is the primary sector, okay? Primary sector. A miller grinds the wheat into flour. That's the secondary sector. A baker turns the flour into bread, the still secondary sector. A grocer sells the bread. That's now the tertiary sector. And finally, the consumer purchases the bread. If you simply add up the sales at each stage, you'll double count the value of inputs that have already been processed. The production approach avoids this by focusing only on the additional value created at each stage. So, for example, farmer, value added is the price received for wheat minus the cost of seeds, fertilizers, etc. While miller, value added is the price received for flour minus the cost of wheat purchased from the farmer. The baker, the value added is the for baker, value added is the price received for bread minus the cost of flour and other ingredients. And the grocer value added is the retail price received minus the cost of bread bought from the baker. When you sum up or when you sum all these value added components across the economy, you arrive at GDP. Alternatively, you could just take the value of final sales to the consumer, meaning the retail price of bread, and you would get the same result because all prior inputs are already accounted for in the final price. So why does this matter for planning? The production approach helps identify which sectors are contributing most to economic output and where there may be bottlenecks or inefficiencies. So for planners, understanding value added at each stage allows for better policy targeting, whether the aim is to support primary producers, modernize manufacturing, or improve distribution. So, for example, in your exam, you have to remember that the production approach sums the value added by every firm and industry. It prevents double at each stage. Also, you need to remember that the sum of all value added equals the value of final output. Okay? So we can go to the next slide. Konti na lang. Kasi, Um, so this is the GDP, GNP, income and expenditure approaches. I think I've mentioned this already. Okay, we can go to the next slide. I already explained that. So there are also limits of national accounts. What are these national accounts again? GDP, GNP, and NI. So national income indicators. Okay. Um, national income. Okay. So what it's trying to say here that we really need to be aware of what these figures captured here in national accounts. So, but they have important limitations like social improvements aren't always reflected, right? When especially for example, what are the examples of social improvements like a reduction in crime? They clearly makes a society better off, but this improvement does not show up in GDP or GNP. So these measures do not account for social gains if they do not involve market transactions. Then also leisure and well-being are ignored because increased leisure time contributes to overall welfare and can lead to better health. However, GDP and GNP do not value leisure. Only paid work is measured. So more work might mean more output, but it can also mean more stress and illness. So this trade-off is not visible in the numbers. Non-market and household activities are also included. Only goods and services sold in the market are included in GDP. So activities like household chores, caregiving, although we already we, we already have some standards uh, for caregiving, di ba? So even volunteer work that create real value, but they're mostly omitted, especially when done in the family setting. So even though their absence would clearly affect well-being. So no adjustment for environmental impact. Actually, this is one of the gaps actually that GDP accounting does not reduce national income to reflect pollution, resource depletion, or environmental damage. So the depletion of forests, clean air, or fisheries is ignored. So GDP fails to deduct the cost and environmental degradation, although we have some standards, but not really being taken seriously by concerned agencies. Um, well, government spending to fix environmental problems such as pollution abatement is even counted as an increase in GDP rather than a cost. So, okay, defending expenditures or defensive let's see. Defensive expenditures are overstated also that when government spends on health protection or environmental cleanup, these are included in GDP, even though they're not signs of real progress, but rather responses to past harm. Also, GDP and GNP say nothing about who receives the income generated. Growth can happen alongside rising inequality. So, redistributive efforts and improvements in income quality do not affect GDP figures. Also, GDP growth must be interpreted in light of population growth. For instance, if the economy grows by 4.5%, but the population also grows by 4.5%, so the average standard of living remains unchanged. Real improvement is seen only when economic growth exceeds population growth. So in your exams, like for example, you need to recognize what GDP and GDP capture, like market activity, measured output and income. But um, you have to be aware also of what's missing, like what are these variables, social, environmental, and distributional dimensions. So for policy and planning, supplement these numbers with indicators of well-being, environmental quality, and equity to get a complete picture of development. So we can go to the next slide. So we have one, two, three remaining. Okay. Slides. So it has this is just a definition of local economic development. It says it's built on collaboration. Okay, local development refers to the collaborative process whereby governments, businesses, community organizations at the local, etc., at the local level engage one another to improve economic well-being of their community, enhance business climate, increase income opportunities, and sustainably utilize human, natural, infrastructural, and institutional resources. So, uh, okay, so the idea is that when these groups work together at the local level, they're able to drive real improvement in economic conditions that reflect the specific needs and opportunities of their community. And this process aims to blah, 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 that I mentioned, improve economic well-being, enhance business climate, increase income opportunities, sustainably use local resources. So, therefore, local economic development means the word is tailoring or I forget, but I can use the word tailoring strategies to fit local strengths, gaps, and priorities. And that's why SWOT analysis is really an important tool. That's the most basic tool in evaluation, actually. So, SWOT analysis. So it demands, yeah, for local economic development, to work out effectively, it demands strong partnerships, practical planning, and a clear focus on both immediate improvements and long-term resilience. So, in your exam, you need to remember that the local aspect requires context-specific solutions, direct stakeholder engagement, and a commitment to sustainable outcomes. So we can go to the next slide. Okay. So, this slide summarizes the structure that supports economic growth. Um, highlighting both the enabling environment and the role of enterprises. So the top is the policy environment, which acts as a driver. Okay. Uh, this is shaped by both macroeconomic and microeconomic policies. Macroeconomics deals with the overall economy. Factors like inflation, interest rates, exchange rates, and fiscal policy. And this set the climate for investment, spending, and growth. Microeconomics addresses how individual businesses, consumers, and markets operate. Effective policies here ensure competition, efficiency, and innovation at the ground level. So together, together both set the enabling environment, the rules, incentives, and stability that allow the rest of the system to function. Uh, but there are we also have enablers of productivity like finance, infrastructure, human resources, natural capital. And so at the enterprise level, all these enablers come together. Okay? Enterprises ranging from micro enterprises to large corporations, they're the direct producers of goods and services. And so their performance depends on the supply and quality of finance, infrastructure, skilled people, and natural resources. So, in summary, economic growth happens when enterprises can operate efficiently and expand. Um, and this depends on both a supportive enabling environment. What are these? I think I mentioned already about support enabling environments such as policy, regulations, macro stability, and the reliable provision of essential resources. So for planners, the challenge is to ensure all these elements are addressed in local and regional planning so that the foundation for growth is solid and also inclusive. Okay, so there are in the next slide there are six M's as in the context of the six M's as strategic resources. Next slide. Okay. Um, the yeah for it says here that for economic development to succeed, six key resources must be present and effectively managed. These are commonly referred to as the six M's, but of course, baka seven M's na nga or eight or something. But for this slide, um, yeah, each one addresses a different requirement for building and sustaining productive activity like materials. What are these? This covers the physical assets required for production, like land, buildings, and location. Access to suitable materials and strategic location sets the foundation for development. Second is manpower, labor. This refers to the workforce, so you know already that, of course, people behind every enterprise, and not just about the numbers here. We are talking here about the skills, the attitudes, mindset, and overall health. So we machine also this all includes all the tools, technologies used in production, both hardware, meaning equipment, machinery, and software, digital tools, systems. They're necessary for efficiency and competitiveness. And markets, of course, no economic activity is sustainable without a viable market. So there must be demand for the goods or services produced, and access to markets must be stable and reliable. Management, the fifth M, effective management brings together people, processes, and resources. So skilled managers organize, direct, and optimize operations, making sure that all other resources are used wisely. The last one is money. This, of course, money. Yeah, access to adequate financing is critical for starting, expanding, and maintaining productive services. So If even one of these six elements is missing or weak, economic development efforts are likely to stall or fail. So, okay, can go last one. I think this one, two. Okay, last two, please. Um, so these are um in enhancing strategic resources. So I already mentioned that to move from potential to actual development, strategic resources must not just be present, they need to be continuously strengthened. So uh it lists the main resource categories and the practical strategies used to enhance them. So we have land and raw materials, labor, tool, technology, and so forth and so on. We can go to the next slide. Last one. The components of economic development strategy. Okay, so there are components. Okay. Um, so it laid out four essential components with a specific focus. Yeah, each with a specific focus. Number one, locality development. We refer to this as the built environment. So this component deals with the community's physical and locational assets such as land use, infra, and spatial design. The goal is to enhance what the community already has and address constraints in its layout, form, and visual appeal. So effective locality development removes barriers to growth and makes the area more attractive for residents, investors, and visitors. The second component is the business development, the demand side. Okay, here the focus is on supporting existing businesses and attracting new ones. Measures can include incentives, streamlining regulations, and providing business support services. And the aim is to create a climate where businesses can start, expand, and thrive, thereby generating jobs and increasing local revenue. The of course, when there's the demand side, there's the supply side, which we call the human resource development. This element is about strengthening the workforce. It targets the unemployed and underemployed by building up skills and capabilities through education, training, and re-skilling programs. The more skilled the workforce, the more adaptable and competitive the community becomes in responding to market changes. The fourth one is the community-based employment, the neighborhood dimension. So this approach empowers residents at the grassroots level. It encourages community-driven projects, cooperatives, and alternative forms of employment. So the focus is on harnessing local talent and creativity, also improving livelihoods and ensuring that economic gains are widely shared. So these are the four components of economic development strategy. So economic development strategies must be first, it must be multidimensional, meaning that it addresses or addressing physical, business, workforce, and community factors in an integrated way. So, okay. So success comes from combining these components to unlock growth, inclusivity, long-term resilience at the local level. And of course, there should be more components, especially uh, in our generation or in our times today. And we really need to uh, look into each of these components. So the next one is local economic development strategy that we can do that in another time, Jen. So local economic development strategy should be done in another time, and maybe we can invite you again. Probably I should continue this tomorrow. So that would be all. Thank you for for your attention. I hope you learned something